All right, tonight we're down to Romans, the 14th chapter. The 14th, very interesting chapter. It's a chapter that there's a lot of controversy about. And I want to take it rather slowly as we go through to try to perhaps answer a lot of questions before we get into the questions that really come to pass. There'll be a lot of questions you have in this particular chapter. We'll talk about it. We'll not try to get through the chapter tonight, but it'll take at least 2 weeks to get through it because there's several things really that will come up. But now, as we start out here in chapter 14, we're going to be talking about the practice of true and now I guess the way that the young people put it today, we're down now to where the rubber meets the road. We're talking about everyday act about things that you deal with every day of your life. And we're talking about things that aggravate you. We're going to be talking about things you don't like. We're going to be talking about things and perhaps saying that you are wrong on certain things. And this chapter is just full of a lot of things, but I can guarantee you that it involves thousands upon thousands of things that you have to deal with in your life. Now the subject is when brethren differ of opinion, difference in what we think, how do we handle those differences? Now we want to note everyone is different. This is the key, really such a universal thing that every one of us needs to get a grasp on. We need to understand what Paul says about this. Now I'm going to work on this for just a moment, and that is every one of us is different. There's nobody else in this world like you. And as we look at it just kind of in a logical way with a major premise, major premise, we all use ourselves as a standard of judgment. Now think about that for just a moment. Your standards of judgment of what is good food, what is good for you, what kind of car you ought to drive, where you live, as we said at the very beginning, is it too hot or is it just right? You use yourself as the standard of judgment in every aspect of this. And there's no other way that you can do it. It's a total impossibility for you to say, well, I'll not use myself, I'll use someone else as a standard of judgment in these things. No, you can only use your own mind really as the standard of judgment as you're going along. The premise is no two people are alike. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But there's absolutely no two people in this world that are alike. The conclusion is no two people will ever agree on all judgments. You can't find me a husband and wife that agree on everything. You can't find me a mother and a child that agree on everything. You can't find me any two that agrees on everything. It is a total impossibility to do that. And yes, Paul is going to be dealing with this now and telling us what to do in some of these cases. So snowflakes are alike. No two people are alike. No one on the planet has ever had a body like yours. Now think about that. From Adam down to now, nobody has ever lived in a body like yours. They haven't had your aches and pains. They haven't had your joys and likes. Nobody has lived in a body exactly like yours. Now most of our bodies are about the same. Okay? We like the temperature this way. We know when it gets too cold, we know when it gets too hot. But guess what? Guess what one of the biggest complaints about women are in this auditorium? Denise, too cold. It's too cold. I don't know whether you're comfortable tonight or not, are you? Oh, okay. Woo! Denise said it's just right. First time in her life she ever said it's just right. Yeah, so if you get it so that most of the people are comfortable, most of the women, including my wife, it's too cold. It's just too cold. And the way you go. Most of you at home know that you have a problem with this. That it's she always wins, but it's either it's always too cold. It's too cold, so we got to turn that thermostat up. It doesn't make any difference what it is. It's what I'm saying. When two people are together, there's always difference in judgment. If you're driving down the road with your best friend and lunchtime, and you say, let's stop and eat, do both of you agree every time on where you ought to stop? Okay, here's the kind of food I like. Oh, me too. That's the best kind of food in the world. No, it doesn't happen. They had a mind like yours. They don't think like yours. They don't have the same traffic patterns in your mind. They don't have the background to think like you think. Now, no one on this planet has ever thought like you think in there. They just don't do it. And the reason for that is no one on the planet has ever had parents like you had. Now, does your upbringing and your parents affect your thinking in any way? Doesn't it? Of course it does. Now, has anybody else had parents exactly like you have them? No. You can say, well, I had some good ones. Well, I did too. Well, but they were totally different. In fact, if you want to get into the family, and you get into the family and there are two people in the family, do the parents treat both children just exactly alike? Or have you heard parents say, I have to put the clamps on Johnny, I can give so-and-so more freedom, I can do this or I can do that? No two children have ever been raised exactly alike. I want us to think about this so that each one of us will understand we are a peculiar being. We're a peculiar being. Nobody here thinks like I think. See? Nobody here likes the things that I like. And that's true with every one of us. Was ever raised in the same environment you were raised in. Does your environment have anything to do with the way you pass judgment or you think today on things that you don't like? If you're raised in the Midwest, lots of people don't like fish. If you're raised out here, most of the people do like fish. Now, there's always vice and versa in here, but the whole point is nobody was ever raised in the same environment that you were raised in. Now, Helen and I, if you take us as the odd couple, or that TV show, I forget, Green Acres, I think was the name of it, wasn't it? She was raised in L.A. She was raised in L.A., and her mother tried to just emphasize constantly, be a lady and have etiquette and do this and do that. And I was raised in a backwoods of which nobody in this room can comprehend. You cannot comprehend the environment that I was raised in. Now, you have seen, how many of you seen Beverly Hillbillies? Have you seen that? Well, some of you haven't, so you can't do it. That's my environment. That old Jed was my neighbor. That's who I dealt with. And that's who I was. And so we'll put it in here. And so that's it. You can't comprehend. You say, well, I've seen the Waltons and I've seen things. The Waltons were millionaires in comparison to where I was raised back in the woods, playing with snakes and possums and coons, and that's all that I really had. And now, when you come out, do you think that there's any difference in Helen and I? In what way? I'll guarantee you it doesn't make any difference what I do. She would not do it that way. She would not do it that way. Now, who's right, by the way? We all vote for me, don't we? You see that I would be the standard that's in there. But, oh no, see, even tonight, she fixed some soup there. We went out on the porch and I got her a spoon. I got her the kind of spoon you ought to eat soup. She said, did you get a spoon? I said, yeah, I've got two of them. She went over and got another spoon and brought it out, because it wasn't exactly the right size. It wasn't a soup spoon. It wasn't round, you see, that was there. So we had 3 spoons out there tonight. Now, my whole point is just this. You wonder what I did? I slapped her silly. Now, you're wondering, what do you do? Well, this is just an illustration, but if we're different in those respects, we're different in every respect of life. And so are you, see? You're different from every other person. That's what we're going to be dealing with here. Now, no one on this planet has ever experienced the same joys and same sorrows that you've experienced. Now, do your joys and your sorrows have anything to do with your judgments? If you were raised in an alcoholic home, does that influence the way you would look? If you had seen your mother beaten, would that influence you in the kind of a father that there should be? If you, in other words, they're just the sorrows and the joys that you go through. If you were cheated out of things when you were a little child, do you think that would influence the way you would deal with people today? And on you go. So your joys and your sorrows. No two people. Now you could just go on with this for 10,000 things. I could put another down there. No two people eat soup the same way. See, that's there. But I'm trying to impress us tonight in this because I want each one of us to understand there's nobody else like me. Just each one of you said, there's nobody else like me. Now, if there's nobody else like me, and you're going to make judgments on what you know and what you like, can you expect everybody to agree with your judgments? So, think about it in that way. And Christ depends on what we do with the differences in our thinking. The vast majority of divisions in religion have to do with people who cannot give up their way of thinking. They know they're right, and they will not give the other person a benefit of a doubt. They know they are right, and it causes more problems than any other thing. I suppose, I don't have any doubt about it. This thing causes more problems than anything has ever caused in the church. This is the way it was in the first century times, it's the way it always has been, and it's the way it is now. And so it's a big subject that we really want to look at. Mankind operates in two realms. That is, we operate in harmony with the Word of God, which is God's revealed will, and man's own private opinion. You do, I do. Each one of us has his Bible. Here's a Bible. And each one of us has our own thinking pattern. We think and we analyze in these things. We live in these two ways. Now, God Himself said this. He said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith Jehovah." In other words, He says there's a vast difference between us in the way that God thinks, which is here in the Bible, and the way man thinks, which takes place up here in our brain. Now, the Apostle Paul tells us what he has done is that God has revealed to him through the Spirit the way God thinks. And Paul said, I have written down in here, the apostles, we've written down God's thoughts. We've written down what God thinks. Now, he, previous to this, has said that there are things God has prepared that our mind has never conceived. Eye has never heard, seen, ear has never heard, and the mind has never conceived the things God prepared for them. But Paul said, but unto us, that's the apostles, God revealed them through the Spirit, for the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. Now look at this. For who among men knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of the man which is in him? Only your spirit knows what you think. He said, even so the things of God, none knoweth save the Spirit of God. Now the things of God, there's a thing up there, it's the same thing as he's talking about, that in the mind of man. Nobody knows what's in my mind. Nobody knows the things in my mind. When you talk about things, if I told you that tomorrow I'm going to load up some things, what do you think about? Everybody has a picture, don't you? It may be furniture, it may be tools, it may be junk, things. Now, all of us have things in our mind. What do we call these things that are in our mind? What do we call them? There's our thoughts, see? Those are our thoughts. Now, the things in God's mind, His thoughts, He now has revealed to man, And Paul said that he's written them down word by word in here, combining spiritual things, that's the things in God's mind, with spiritual words. So here we have these two realms. We have what God says, absolute, and we have what man thinks, which is not absolute. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think there's any two people in this room that has the same thoughts over there on the right side, that your brain is thinking the same thing even right now as anybody else in this room? No. Do you think that you know exactly the same thing that anybody else knows in this room? I want two people raise your hand who know exactly the same thing. I don't want one of you to know more than the other. Well, you say, no. No, some people know a lot, some people don't know very much. So some people on down the line, no. It's kind of a relative thing over here when we're talking about man's thinking over here. This over here is binding. God's word is absolutely binding. But over here, we operate in the realm of liberty. Now, when God says something, you and I don't have a right to say, we're not going to do it. It's binding. But when I think, now as soon as I say I think, you finish the sentence. It doesn't make any difference what it is. I think. You finish the sentence. Is that binding? When you stand before the judgment bar of God, how many times is God going to say, Lowell thought, and you didn't agree with what he thought? No. That's not how it's going to be. So over here, when a man says, I think, now we're operating in the realm of liberty. I think it ought to be this way. Someone else said, I think it ought to be that way. And the Jews have a saying that says, if there are 12 Jews in a room, there'll be 13 different opinions. Well, that's not true with us that's in there. Now then, what happens though, now then we're getting down really to it. What happens when there's no question that the Bible teaches God's mind and it is binding? I agree with that. You agree with that. We're not talking about denominational people that say, oh, I don't think you have to do this. We're not talking about heathens. We're talking about two brethren, and we both agree God's word is binding. Whatever God says, it's binding. But, and here's the but that we've got in here, one Christian thinks God has given us liberty to do something, and another Christian thinks God has not given us liberty to do something. Now, what are we going to do? Now then, we could start thinking about 10,000 things about this. When we say, okay, now here's a person that says, I think God has given me the liberty to do it. Others say, I don't think he has. We'll get into things that right here in this group of people. I'll let you bring them up, things that you want to talk about. It'll be good to talk about. Let me give you something that is a problem in the South. And in fact, about 2 months ago, I got a call from a lady in Oregon, and they're thinking about moving up here to Snohomish, and she wanted to talk to me about what we thought and so forth, and what we did, and all this. And she said, okay, boy, said, I like what I hear. I said, now, what will you do? What happens if I come in with a veil on my head, with a covering on my head? Will you permit that, or will you laugh at me, or what? Now let me ask you, why did she ask me that question? Because there's a goodly number of people, especially in the South, who believe that a woman has to have some kind of a covering on her head when she comes to worship. And if she doesn't, she's sinning. And so this woman would not come here unless she's permitted to put something on her head. Now, is there any place in the Bible that talks about a woman being covered, having her head covered? There is, isn't there? 1 Corinthians 11. And so she reads that. She reads the Bible, and she says, I think God demands I have that covering up there on my head. Now somebody else will say, well, how big a covering does it have to be a covering? Well, there's another opinion. See? And so you have lots of opinions, but we're not dealing with all the ramifications. Here's a woman that says, I believe that I have to have a covering. Well, what should my answer have been? She says, can I come there and wear a covering? Well, certainly. Of course you can. See? Of course you can. Can other women come and not wear a covering? Yeah. Why? Because they think that God has given us the liberty to do it. So one says, I've got the liberty. I can either wear a covering or not wear a covering. Now, another thing that has caused a lot of problems, let's say, is the war question. Can a Christian go to war and kill? Can a Christian go to war and kill? Well, is there anything in the Bible that talks about killing and saying, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder? So then one person says, okay, the Bible says thou shalt not kill, and the word there means murder, and so you can't go to war and kill because you'll be killing innocent people, and if you do that, you're a sinner. I don't have anything to do with you if you do that. The other one says, wait just a minute. I think I can. I think I can because killing in time of war is not the same as murder. And they'll give examples. One time, David's captain, who went out and killed lots of people in war, sending him out, and he was killing lots of people. And then this captain sent in word to come in and wanted to talk with him and talk about peace. And so he said, come on in. And so he came in, and when he came in, David's captain killed that captain. Now, he'd been out there trying to kill him for years, but when he came in, killed him. And David said, you have killed him in time of peace. And he put the harshest type of punishment upon him. You have done that. Well, there's a difference in killing in time of peace and killing in time of war. You read the Bible there. Another one said 1 Corinthians 13. It says, obey your government. Now, what's the purpose of government? It's to protect us, isn't it? It's to watch out for the evildoers. Now, if the evildoers start coming in and going to kill all of us, what's the obligation of our government? Is to protect us. And what does the Bible say about Christians? What are you to do to the government if the government says, come, I want you? Well, it says obey. So a person says, I believe I can do that. I believe I can go to war and kill in time of war. The other one says, no, even in time of war, even if the government says it, you have to obey God and not the government. Well, that's true too. Now you see where we are? In other words, I've thrown out an argument here, and here's the argument. Now let me ask you this question. Brethren have been arguing over this ever since America has been established. What's the answer? What's the answer? Have we concluded that there is an answer? Have we found an answer so that we're all united on it, such as baptism for remission of sins? No. No, we're not. Okay. What are these two brothers supposed to do? One brother is a conscientious objector. He says, I will not go to war. I will go to prison before I go to war. The other one says, I will go. And he goes and becomes an airplane pilot and bombs people and has killed people. War's over. They come back together. They're sitting here. Now then, one says, I think you were wrong by going and killing. The other one says, no, I think I had the option to go in there. Now we got a problem. We've got a problem here. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation? Now there are 100,000 things that come up. That may be an exaggeration by 2 or 3, but there are all kinds of things that come up that fall in these kind of categories. That's what chapter 14 is going to be talking about. What do we do under these circumstances? In here. So that's when one thinks he has the liberty, one thinks he doesn't, that it's God's law and you can't do it. Now, in the New Testament times, the big thing, and Paul is going to use that as an illustration in chapter 14 when we get there. Let me give you the problem, so when we get there and we go through the verses, well then we'll have it. Eating meats. This was the, I guess, second biggest problem that they had in New Testament period of time. What would you say the first biggest problem was? I don't know, this is my judgment in there. What was the big problem that they had to deal with all the time? Circumcision. Do you have to be circumcised in there in order to be saved? Then the other was eating meats. Now, here's what happened. During the first several years, the church's existence, was it made up of Jews or Gentiles? Made up of Jews. For 1,600 years, the Jews had the law of Moses, and it had been ingrained within them that you can only eat certain kinds of meats. And these meats have to have certain characteristics about them. They must chew the cud and have a cloven hoof and so forth. And so you have to eat only a certain kind of meat. Now, what about a Gentile? What was their feelings about eating meat? Dang. Pigs was one of their greatest delicacies. Pigs was something they offered on their altars. Not so with the Jews. So for 1,600 years it was ingrained in them. Now, as you look at society at that time, try to put yourself back in this situation. Here you have the Jewish nation. You have all the other nations who are Gentiles. Now, all the other nations, there weren't any atheists. They all believed in gods, and they all worshiped their gods. And their gods were idols. And their idols were in mythology. They were myths, but they had made it up. So all these Gentiles, they all built temples. Every city would build temples. Just like today, you go out here, there's all different kind of church buildings because there's all different kind of doctrines. So there's a division. Back then, if anybody named the name of Christ, they were just a New Testament Christian. There were no denominations existed. But all over town, there were different temples. There'd be a temple to Zeus, a temple to Diana, a temple to this, a temple to that. And these people would worship their gods, and they would offer sacrifices to their gods. Now, when they offered these sacrifices, they offered animal sacrifices. And so some of them would come together on Monday night, some Tuesday night. But now, when they came together, let's say to worship the god Zeus, they came together on Tuesday night. And so they killed this animal, and they offered the animal to god Zeus. They drained the blood out. They drank some of the blood. They offered it to Zeus. They dedicated the bull to Zeus. Then they cut up the bull, and they burned a chunk of it to Zeus. And then they cut up the steaks and the roast, and they ate it. And they would sell it in their temples. And so you'd go down to the temple, and you then could buy the meal of here from these animals and eat there in the temple. Now, what was left over, whatever meat was left over, there was always an ample number of amount of meat that was left over, they would take down to the marketplace. This is where Safeway got their meat in first century times. See? They didn't have the USDA stamp of approval and so forth. The grocery stores, the marketplaces, the meat factories over there, they would get their meat just in this way. They would take the meat down that's left over and sell them to a meat dealer. Now, even today, when you go over in that country, how do you go into look at meat? You don't go into a store and look at it the way we do here. You're walking down the aisle. How many of you saw those goats that I showed when I was showing some pictures? Came back from Israel, and there they were. We're just walking down. Here's a dress shop. Here's this. Here's some goats hanging right there on the street. You see that is there, and goat heads laying around. Driving down the road one day in a bus, and I looked out in this town, this Palestinian town, and it was an old town, which all those towns are, and there was a cow laying on the sidewalk, and the head of the cow was in the street, and they'd killed the cow, and they'd cut its throat, and the blood was rolling off of the sidewalk into the gutter. And we went by, and I looked at that thing. Did you see that? And I don't know who saw it. Did you see it, Steve? Yeah, okay. So it was just something. What in the world did? Well, that's the way that they butcher their cows over there. Now, you go downtown tomorrow and buy a roast. Will you be buying a roast that's been offered to Zeus, or will you be buying a roast that farmer has raised and killed? Is there any way of knowing? Absolutely no way of knowing. Absolutely no way of knowing. Here's the carcass. Where'd it come from? I don't know. Bought it off this guy. I bought that off this guy. Right? Some of them brought it in off of their farms, sold it, and others brought it in out of the temples. Now, here's the Jewish perspective. These are the people that have been converted to Christ. What can you have to do with idols if you're a Christian? What are we told to do about idols? Flee. Have nothing to do with idols. Don't worship at an idol's temple. Don't offer anything to idols. Now, when you go down and you buy that piece of meat, the chances are really good, probably 50% or more, that you're going to get a piece of meat that was offered to a god last night. Can you eat it? If you go down and you take the chance, you go down and you buy meat 2 or 3 days in a row, I'll guarantee you're going to get it that's been offered to an idol. Can you take it home and can you eat that meat? Now you put yourself down. You and I know the answer. I know you know the answer when I'm asking these questions, because Paul deals with it. And he told us back in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 through 10. He gave us the answer to that question. But I'm trying to get you to see, place yourself back there, and you don't have the answer to that question. Can you do that? And so someone says, sure you can. We know that when they offer the meat to Zeus, there ain't no Zeus up there, is there? There's no God up there. Nothing happened to that meat. It's just a bunch of people that says we offered it to Zeus. It didn't taint the meat. We're not offering it to Zeus. They offered it to Zeus. They sold it down there. I'm buying it to eat as meat. Nothing happened to the meat. So I can eat the meat. But another person says, nope, I'm not having anything to do with idols. And Lowell, when you go down and you buy your meat the way you do, you know yourself that you eat a lot of meat that's been offered to an idol. And you're not a very good Christian. That's wrong. You're an idolater. Now, got this problem. I think I can do that. I'm not an idolater. I'm not offering it to an idol. But they see it as idolatry. They say you can't eat it, so you need to eat vegetables. You need to be a vegetarian. You need to eat herbs so you won't become an idolater. Well, now, I know idolatry is wrong. I'm not about to become an idolater, but I'm eating this meat, and they say when you do it, you're committing idolatry. I say, no, I'm not. They say, yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Now what are we going to do? That's the big question. And Paul is going to deal with that in here. Then he said some people keep a day and others don't. Well, you do. Now to you and to me, that's not a big deal. But back there, these people that had been converted, they were Jews. And how many days did God set aside for Jews to keep? And they were supposed to keep it. In fact, what is the most well-known and famous of all of them? The Sabbath day. The Sabbath day, or the day of Pentecost, or the day of Passover. Now, when you take 1,600 years of families keeping these days, how easy is it for you to be converted to Christ and give that up in an hour's time? You talk about tough. Those people had some tough living to give up. Some tough living to give up. I'll tell you another thing that was tough. From the day of Abraham, 2,000 years ago, God had called the Jews away, and everybody else were Gentiles, and the Jews didn't have anything to do with Gentiles, and the Jews looked down on Gentiles. They wouldn't eat with Gentiles. They wouldn't go in the house of Gentiles. They wouldn't drink in the same cup as a Gentile. They had nothing to do with Gentiles, and in one day's time, one day, Acts 10, poor old Peter was up on the housetop praying. God appeared to him in that sheet. And God told him, he said, there are 3 men coming at the gate. You get down and you go with them, and don't you doubt anything. Whatever they say, you do. He went out there not knowing a thing in the world what they were going to say. And they say, our master is Cornelius, a Roman Gentile, and he wants you to come and tell him what to do to be saved. Come to his house. And when Peter walked in his house, Peter says, you know how it's an unlawful thing for a Jew to go into the house of a Gentile. But God told me not to doubt, and I'm here. One day, you had to change all that. Have you changed all of your prejudices? Do you have any prejudices at all? Have you read where all men are one? We all come from Adam. How easy is it to change prejudices? You see what I'm talking about? Where the rubber meets the road. That's what I'm talking about tonight. I'm talking about things that affect us in everyday life. Now then, here it is. Some of these Jews say, I feel like that I should not work on the Sabbath day, which would be Saturday. I've never done it in my life. My daddy never did it. My granddaddy never did it. My great-granddaddy never did it. My great-great-granddaddy did it, and on back. And nobody ever did it. And I just think that I shouldn't do that. And so they don't. Over here's another guy, a Gentile, never kept the Sabbath. Easy for them. They said, well, I wouldn't keep that day. See, this is not a problem for you or me because it's been too many years intervening. But now, back there, a Gentile says, I'm not going to keep it. These Jews said, I think, boy, there must be something special about the Sabbath or God wouldn't have had us to have kept it for 1,600 years. It's God's special day. And I can't just throw it away. Another said, well, sure you can. Don't keep it. I can't. I just feel bad. I can't. I just can't do it. Okay, what are you going to do? Now, these are some problems they had in the first century period of time. These were real problems. They were real problems. Most of ours are just tiddlywinks in comparison to the problems that they had. But these were real. And Paul's going to deal with these things. And I hope that our eyes are opened when we look at it. There's thousands and thousands more things that a couple of them that we talked about tonight. You write down the things. It's next week. We can bring them up. And you'll see that there are hundreds of things that fall in this category that's in here. Now here, the one Christian thinks God has given him the liberty to do something. In his mind, he says, I have liberty given to me by God. The other one down here says, no, it's a matter of doctrine. Now, I want to disperse a thought right now of something. Many times we say chapter 14 is just talking about opinions, just things in opinions. Well, now stop and wait a minute. Even if it is just things and opinions, what does that bottom guy think it is? What's his viewpoint? What does he think it is? It's doctrine. He says it's doctrine. Now, what does God tell him to do? If he thinks you're violating doctrine, what God tell him to do? You say, no, it's just liberty. He said, no, it's doctrine. What God tell you to do? See? That's what he's going to be dealing with. Now I want you to notice this. In every case, doesn't make any difference what it is, one is right and one is wrong. It's either right or wrong to eat meats. It's either right or wrong to keep days. It's either right or wrong to kill in war. It's either right or wrong. You name the subject, it's either right or wrong. One of the two that's there. We're not talking about something that just falls there in the middle. Harry Wiest had this statement. I think it's really good, so I just quoted him. The question of what is right or wrong of the activity is not given significant consideration in this text. Now, in Romans 14, Paul is not going to talk about it to any extent, whether it's right or wrong. Of course, there is a right and a wrong, but each believes he's right and the other is wrong. Do you see that? I want to lay the groundwork tonight so we see that. See? The guy up there that says it's liberty, he believes the other guy is wrong for making a doctrine out of it. The other guy who makes a doctrine out of it, he believes the other guy is wrong because it's just liberty. He looks at him and he said, it's kind of like saying you can either be baptized or not be baptized. This is serious. Now, the instructions given are how to deal with one another in light of this disagreement. That's what this chapter is going to be about. Now, things to consider before we enter into the study. Truth is truth, regardless of what any man thinks. So whatever we're talking about it, don't you go away and say, Lowell says true and sometimes it's not, or this or that. No, truth is truth. It doesn't make any difference what any man says. When two people disagree, one is right and one is wrong, or they are both wrong. But they both can't be right. You see that? Those are the only options you've got. Number 3, there are realms in which judgments have to be made by men. Sometimes men have to be condemned as wrong. Now here is where we're going to have to deal with some of these things, and we're going to be able to see a secret as it comes out, and it's going to help us a little bit when we look at this. Now in John 7:24, Jesus said, judge righteous judgment. So Jesus said we are to judge, but we are to judge righteous judgment. Now in Matthew chapter 7 verse 15, there's where Jesus says, you shall know them by their fruits. He said, beware false teachers who come to you as wolves in sheep's clothing. You'll know them by their fruit. A good tree can't produce evil, and evil can't produce good, and you'll know them by their fruit. Well, no, wait a minute. If we're to watch out for false teachers, do we have to make any judgments? Yeah, we got to make some judgments. In Romans chapter 1, verse 24 through 32, you remember all of those verses there started out with homosexuality and had that whole list of sins? And when somebody's engaging in that, Paul says they're wrong. And if you agree with them, you're wrong. So you have to judge in that respect. In Romans 16th chapter, same book, and in verse 17, let me read you here what Paul had to say. He said, Mark them that are causing the divisions and occasions of stumbling, contrary to the doctrine which you learned, and turn away from them. We have to make some judgments. We do have to mark some people. But next week we're going to see where in this realm he says, don't you do it. Now the question is, and here's where we're going to stop, when do we have the right to do that? And what is Romans 14 talking about? That's where we'll pick up our story next week because time just ran out. Okay, class dismissed.